On Christmas Eve 2017, a video went live on social media. A father and his 11-year-old son, laughing, leaning into each other, singing Christmas carols for the camera. The boy's name was Nigel. He looked happy. He looked safe. 90 minutes later, he was gone. And the man in that video, the man smiling at the camera while his son sang, was the one who took him.
Hey guys, smiling, and I'm hanging out with Nigel on Christmas Eve, and we're about to embarrass ourselves. We're gonna sing. You ready?
Yeah.
Me. Okay, sorry. You better watch out.
You better not cry.
You better not pout.
I'm telling you why.
Santa Claus is coming to town.
Dope.
This is the story of Anthony Milan Ross, a man the world called a hero, a man his family knew as something else entirely, and a Christmas Eve that exposed the distance between those two things. You are watching because something about this case felt different. Before this video is over, you will understand exactly why. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see how far this story has traveled, and subscribe if you are not already part of this community. To understand what happened on North 16th Street in Phoenix, Arizona, you first have to understand who Anthony Milan Ross was, or more precisely, who he had convinced the world he was. By 2014, Milan was a recognizable name in Arizona's culinary and wellness circles. He hosted pop-up dining events. He launched restaurant concepts. He was a fixture on local television in Phoenix and Tucson. He appeared in magazines. He was featured in a vegan documentary that included Samuel L. Jackson among its subjects. He wrote a book called The Change. He built an entire personal brand around a single catchphrase. Change is a verb. The story he told over and over was the story of his transformation. At his heaviest, Milan weighed over 500 pounds. He described himself during that period as a prisoner, trapped inside a body he could not control, watching his life shrink around him. The turning point, the one he returned to in every interview, every speech, every caption, happened at Universal Studios in Orlando. He had taken his young son Nigel to the theme park. They stood in line for the Harry Potter ride. When they reached the front, Milan lowered himself into the seat. The safety bar would not close. The staff told him he had to exit the ride. He had to walk back past the line, past hundreds of strangers, while his son watched. That was the moment, he said, that broke him open. He went home and changed everything. He adopted a plant-based diet. He dropped 250 pounds. He called himself the vegan magician. He told anyone who would listen that if a man who once could not fit into a theme park ride could rebuild himself, then anyone could. People believed him. They had every reason to. The before and after photos were real. The weight loss was real. And the story he wrapped around it, of a devoted father transforming himself for his son, was exactly the kind of narrative that earns trust. He had a wife, Iris Sutherland. He had Nigel. He later had a daughter, Honora, born in early 2017. He posted all of it. The meals he cooked, the workouts, the family moments. It was carefully curated, relentlessly positive, and built on a foundation that was beginning to crack. Because behind the camera, Milan was drowning. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a breakdown like this one. And leave a comment. Milan was skilled at being known. He was not skilled at running a business. His restaurant ventures failed one after another. Some closed within months of opening. He took out high-interest loans to sustain the appearance of success. He ran up credit card debt. By 2017, he owed approximately $60,000 across business loans and personal accounts. The celebrity chef was, in financial terms, a fiction. The family's stability rested almost entirely on Iris's income. She held a steady professional position. She paid the bills. She kept the household running, while Milan pursued a fame that was no longer generating revenue. This arrangement was not sustainable, and for Milan, it was not tolerable. The man who presented himself to the public as grounded and disciplined was, at home, controlling and volatile. He tracked Iris's phone. He demanded access to her emails. He required an account of her time, her movements, her communications. He accused her of dishonesty without evidence. He constructed scenarios of betrayal and then punished her for them. Neighbors later recalled hearing arguments late at night. One described seeing Iris sitting alone in her car in the apartment complex's parking lot, not going inside, just sitting, staring ahead, as though the threshold of her own home had become a place she needed to prepare herself to cross. Another neighbor said Milan had cornered him outside and spent an extended period complaining that Iris was working to damage his reputation. He was consumed by the idea that the life he had built publicly could be pulled out from under him. What Milan feared most was not poverty. It was exposure. And there was something specific he was afraid of being exposed for, something he had spent years keeping buried. When Milan met Iris in 2009 and built a new life with her in Arizona, he presented himself as a man stepping into something for the first time. A man of faith, he said, a man of discipline, a man determined to be the father and partner he had always wanted to be. He did not tell her he had been that kind of man before, and that he had walked away from it. In 2003, in St. Louis, Missouri, Anthony Milan Ross was married to a woman named Nicole. They had 4 daughters together. He was not, by any account, a safe or stable presence in that household. And in 2003, without explanation, without provision, without any communication to the 4 children he was leaving behind, he simply left. Nicole was left to raise 4 girls on her own. He never called. He never sent money. He never reached out to check whether his daughters were alive or well. He erased that life from his history and started over. Iris did not know any of this when she married him. She found out years later, not from a confession, but from documents, court records, old filings that surfaced when she began looking into the inconsistencies she had noticed accumulating in his story. The discovery landed with full force. Her husband had 4 children he had never mentioned, 4 daughters he had left without a word, without a backward glance. It was not just the lie, it was the ease of it, the completeness of it. If he had erased 4 children from his life once before, the question that followed, the one Iris could not stop hearing, was what would stop him from doing the same to Nigel and Honora. His daughters from Missouri, Ebony and Shalonda, eventually testified at his trial. They did not speak about the holiday that ended with 3 deaths. They spoke about their own childhoods, what it was like to grow up under his authority. They described a household defined by control. Milan used food as a disciplinary tool. He would withhold basic ingredients, butter, sugar, for months at a time as punishment. When his daughters fell short of his expectations, he made them eat plain rice while he watched, not as a practical measure, as a demonstration of power. One of the daughters described staying home from school for extended periods because the marks on her face from his physical discipline were too visible. He did not want teachers asking questions. He wanted the house sealed off, a closed environment where his authority was total and unquestioned. When he walked out of that environment in 2003, he did not leave behind a man who had lost his temper once. He left behind a pattern, and that pattern had simply relocated to Phoenix. The world saw a man who had conquered his body and was now inspiring others. His daughters in Missouri saw their father on television, winning awards and being celebrated, while they had been left without support, without contact, without explanation. They knew exactly who he was. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a breakdown like this one, and leave a comment. By 2017, Iris had seen enough. She had found the documents about his Missouri family. She had watched the businesses fail. She had lived with the surveillance, the accusations, the unpredictability. She had been supporting the household financially for years, while her husband spent money they did not have, and presented the family to the world as evidence of his greatness. She contacted a divorce attorney. She began researching apartments. She was methodical and careful about it, because she understood the risk. She had seen what Milan was like when he felt his control slipping. She did not want to give him a window to respond until she was ready to move. In December 2017, she told him directly. She wanted a separation. The marriage was over. Milan's reaction moved between 2 registers, desperation and threat. He sent messages begging her to stay. In other messages, the tone shifted entirely. He told her that if she left, she would regret it. He told her she was making a promise she would not want him to keep. Iris did not back down. She told him she had consulted a lawyer. She told him she was planning to move out. On December 20th, 2017, she sent a text message to her sister. It said she was scared. It said she did not know what Milan was capable of when he felt trapped. She told her sister she was planning to leave quietly, without confrontation, without warning, because she understood the corner she was dealing with. Her sister called immediately. The two of them spoke. Iris sounded calm, her sister would later say, not panicked, focused. She was not a woman frozen by fear. She was a woman in motion, working toward an exit for herself and her children. What Iris did not know was how far ahead of her he already was. When detectives seized Milan's phone and laptop following his arrest, they did not find a man who had broken down under pressure. They found a man who had been preparing. The digital record began on December 10th, 2017, 2 weeks before the murders. On that date, Milan began searching for information on life insurance. He wanted to understand payout structures. He specifically searched for how the cause of a spouse's death, whether ruled a homicide or a suicide, affected the insurance benefit. He was calculating. On December 15th, the searches changed direction. He began researching how forensic investigators collect and identify biological evidence at a crime scene. He looked up which cleaning products were most effective at removing that type of evidence. He searched for methods of disabling home security systems. On December 20th, the same day Iris sent her sister a message saying she was scared, Milan was searching for information on how long it takes for a human body to decompose. He was researching the odor produced during that process and the rate at which physical evidence breaks down over time. He was not in crisis, he was studying. Between those searches, he posted motivational content to his social media accounts. He told his followers to embrace change, to show up for the people they loved. He was sending those messages while researching, in specific and practical terms, what would happen after he ended his family. He also spent time on online forums during this period. He posted in spaces focused on men's grievances and divorce and custody situations. He positioned himself as a man being victimized by a spouse who wanted to take everything from him. He built a narrative, in writing, in which he was the wronged party, the one under attack. Forensic psychologists who reviewed the case noted that this combination of behaviors is not consistent with impulsive violence. It is consistent with premeditation, with someone who has already made a decision and is working through the logistics. This was not a man who snapped. This was a man who made a choice and spent 2 weeks getting ready. December 24th, 2017, Phoenix, Arizona. At 2:52 in the afternoon, Milan posted a video to his Facebook page. He and Nigel were sitting together in the apartment on North 16th Street. They were laughing. They were singing "Santa Claus is Coming to Town." Nigel leaned into his father, slightly off-key, grinning at the camera. Milan smiled. He told his son he was doing great. He posted that video to the public. He tagged it. He let it upload. And then he prepared. Iris was coming to the apartment that afternoon for a scheduled custody exchange. She was there to pick up the children for a Christmas visit. She had no reason to believe anything was wrong with the arrangement. She had been careful. She had been moving toward her exit quietly, the way she had planned. She arrived at the apartment complex around 3:45 in the afternoon. She walked toward Unit 2131. She approached the patio. She never made it through the door. Neighbors heard the shots. Several looked out their windows. What they saw was Iris on the ground outside the patio. Milan was standing near her. He was not running. He was not shouting. He was calm. He turned and walked back inside the apartment. He closed the door. Within seconds, 911 calls began coming in from multiple residents of the complex. One caller reported that a woman had been shot on the patio of a ground floor unit. Another caller said children were inside the apartment. Phoenix police arrived within minutes. They found Iris Sutherland Ross on the pavement outside Unit 2131. She was 38 years old. She did not survive. The officers turned their attention to the closed apartment door. They knew Nigel was inside. They knew 10-month-old Honora was inside. They did not know the condition of the children. Milan had barricaded the door with furniture. The Phoenix SWAT team mobilized. Surrounding apartments were evacuated. A perimeter was established around the building. Officers took tactical positions on surrounding rooftops. The entire block of North 16th Street was locked down on Christmas Eve, while families in the surrounding homes stayed low and waited. Crisis negotiators reached Milan by phone. They asked about the children. They asked him to open the door. They talked to him calmly and continuously, working the conversation the way negotiators are trained to, slowly, patiently, watching for a way in. Milan's voice, according to the officers who were present, was steady. He did not sound panicked. He did not sound distressed. He sounded like a man who had completed something and was sitting with it. At some point during the negotiations, he told the officers that the children were already gone. He said he had ended Nigel's life. He said he had ended Honora's life. He said it without escalation, without grief. He reported it the way someone reports a task they have finished. The officers sent a remote camera unit into the apartment to assess the interior. The footage it transmitted back confirmed what Milan had told them. Nigel, who had been laughing and singing on camera less than an hour earlier, was gone. Honora, who was 10 months old and had only recently begun to crawl, was gone. The standoff continued for hours. During that time, Milan fired at the officers from inside the apartment. He was not trying to escape. He was not attempting to negotiate terms. He appeared, based on the accounts of responding officers, to want an audience. He had spent years performing for cameras. That instinct did not leave him. Just before 10 o'clock that evening, the SWAT team made entry. They used flashbang devices and breached the door. Milan did not go down fighting. When the officers reached him, he lowered himself to the floor and allowed himself to be restrained. He had spent the day ensuring 3 people could not survive. He made sure he did. As officers led him out of the apartment in a white t-shirt and red shorts, he did not look at the ground where Iris had fallen. He did not look in the direction of his children. He looked at the cameras that had gathered outside the perimeter. He was still performing. Anthony Milan Ross was taken into custody on the night of December 24th, 2017. The trial did not begin until early 2024. 6 years and 2 months separated the arrest from the courtroom. For Iris's family, for Iris's mother, for her sister, who received the text that said she was scared. That gap was not an abstract legal delay. It was 6 years of waking up every day with the case unresolved. Milan used that time strategically. He dismissed his legal team multiple times. Under Arizona law, each new attorney requires adequate time to review the case, filings, evidence, prior proceedings. Every dismissal reset the preparation clock. Each new counsel needed months to reach a functional understanding of a case that had accumulated years of documentation. He also filed claims asserting that he was not mentally competent to stand trial. Under the law, such a claim requires a formal evaluation before proceedings can continue. The court brought in independent mental health professionals to assess him. Their conclusion? He was competent. He was fit to stand trial. He was, in the clinical language of the evaluation, functioning adequately and understood the nature of the proceedings against him. The competency claims bought time, nothing more. Then, in 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic reached Arizona. Courts across the state suspended operations for extended periods. Cases that were already moving slowly came to a stop. The Milan Ross case joined the backlog. By the time the trial finally opened in Maricopa County Superior Court in early 2024, the evidence had been documented for over 6 years. The witnesses had been waiting for over 6 years. The family had been waiting for over 6 years. The courtroom filled on the day proceedings began. Iris's family sat on one side, wearing ribbons in memory of Iris, Nigel, and Honora. Milan sat across from them. He had aged visibly since his arrest. He was grayer, quieter in his movements. But those who watched him closely noted that his eyes held the same quality they had always held: distant, assessing, unreadable. He sat through the proceedings as though observing someone else's case. The prosecution entered more than 80 pieces of evidence. They began with the digital record. The searches, the insurance research on December 10th, the forensic investigation queries on December 15th, the decomposition research on December 20th. They showed the jury the dates and the specific terms that had been entered into search engines. They presented those searches not as background context, but as a documented timeline of intent. They presented the text messages between Milan and Iris in the weeks before December 24th. The court heard the messages where he told her she would regret leaving. They heard Iris's responses, measured, firm, clear. They heard what she said to her sister on December 20th. Then the prosecution showed the jury the video. The timestamp read 2:52 p.m. Nigel and Milan, laughing, singing. The boy's voice slightly off pitch, his father's arm around him. Then the prosecution showed the jury the first 911 call, logged at 3:45 p.m., 53 minutes. The prosecution did not need to elaborate. The jury could read the math. The forensic testimony was the hardest portion of the trial to endure. The medical examiner took the stand and walked the jury through the physical findings of the case. Several jurors wept during this testimony. Experienced court personnel looked away from the evidence photographs. The examination of the record was thorough, clinical, and devastating. Milan did not look at the photographs. He stared at the wall directly in front of him. He did not blink. He did not show any change in expression. He sat through the presentation of evidence from his children's autopsies with the affect of someone waiting for an appointment to end. A veteran detective took the stand and testified about the moments after Milan's arrest, when officers informed him that the children had not survived. This investigator told the jury he had spent over 2 decades in law enforcement. He had delivered catastrophic news to families in some of the worst circumstances imaginable. He said he had never witnessed a response like the one Milan gave that night. Milan did not ask what had happened. He did not break down. He did not express anything that resembled grief or distress. He asked for his attorney. Iris's sister testified about the text message. She read it aloud to the court. The room went quiet while her voice moved through the words Iris had sent her on December 20th, 4 days before Christmas Eve. She told the jury what the phone call after that message had sounded like. She described Iris's voice. She described the plan Iris had been building. She made clear to the jury that her sister was not a passive figure in this story. She was a woman who had assessed the danger accurately and was actively working to get her children out. Milan's daughters from Missouri, Ebony and Shalanda, took the stand and testified about who their father was before Phoenix, before the brand, before the weight loss. They described the household in St. Louis, the food deprivation used as punishment, the physical discipline that left marks they had to conceal before going to school, the absolute authority he demanded from everyone under his roof. Their testimony did not address the murders directly. It addressed something the prosecution needed the jury to understand, that the man in this courtroom had not transformed, that the behaviors documented in this case were not an aberration. They were a continuation. The defense mounted their challenge on 2 fronts. First, they argued that the physical evidence was circumstantial. No weapon was recovered in his hand at the moment of the shooting. No confession had been made at the scene in a legally usable form. They pointed to gaps and challenged the interpretation of the digital searches. Then they argued mental state. They brought in an expert witness to testify that Milan had been suffering a psychological breakdown, that the pressure of his collapsing finances and marriage had overwhelmed his capacity for rational decision-making, and that what occurred on Christmas Eve was not a premeditated act, but a catastrophic mental crisis. Under cross-examination, the defense's own expert conceded a significant problem with that argument. Anthony Milan Ross had no documented history of mental health treatment, no hospitalizations, no prescriptions, no therapy records, no clinical documentation of any kind indicating a deteriorating mental condition prior to December 24th, 2017. A man who researches insurance payouts, forensic evidence collection, and decomposition timelines over a 2-week period is not a man in the grip of an unpredictable mental collapse. He is a man who has made a decision and is working through the practical implications of it. The defense argument did not survive the cross-examination. The trial lasted several weeks, with opening statements beginning in September 2025. On November 3, 2025, the jury completed their deliberations and returned to the courtroom. The clerk read the verdict on the first count, guilty. The second count, guilty. The third count, guilty of the first-degree murder of Iris Sutherland Ross, guilty of the first-degree murder of Nigel, guilty of the first-degree murder of Honora. When the word was spoken for the third time, an audible sound moved through the courtroom. Iris's mother lowered her head. The Missouri daughters, watching from a distance through news coverage, felt something release, something they had been carrying for a very long time. Milan sat still, no change in expression, no visible reaction. He allowed the guards to guide him out of the courtroom in restraints. The same composure he had maintained through every moment of the trial held until the end. He had run out of delays. The guilty verdict on November 3, 2025, was not the end of the legal process. In Arizona, a first-degree murder conviction involving the killing of children makes a defendant eligible for the death penalty. That determination does not belong to the judge alone. It goes back to the jury. The same jury that found Anthony Milan Ross guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder was now tasked with deciding whether he would spend the rest of his life in a cell or face execution. Sentencing was initially scheduled for January 9, 2026. The penalty phase that followed was a separate proceeding, a trial within a trial focused not on guilt, which had already been established, but on consequence. Prosecutors argued that the nature of these crimes placed this case in the category that warranted the ultimate penalty. They pointed to the victims, a 10-month-old baby, an 11-year-old boy, and a 38-year-old woman who had done nothing except try to leave a dangerous marriage. They pointed to the 2-week documented trail of planning. They pointed to the fact that Milan had filmed a video with his son, posted it publicly, and then acted on a plan he had been preparing since December 10th. They argued that the calculated, deliberate nature of what he did, and his complete absence of remorse throughout, placed him among the cases for which the death penalty exists. The defense made their final case for his life. They asked the jury to consider his background, his struggles, the years he spent building something the public valued. Defense attorney Carrie Gallagher acknowledged the weight of what had happened, while arguing that the totality of his life deserved consideration before the jury made an irreversible decision. As of late April 2026, closing arguments in the penalty phase were underway in Maricopa County Superior Court. The jury was hearing final arguments from both sides before beginning deliberations on whether Anthony Milan Ross would be sentenced to death or to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The process that began on Christmas Eve 2017, when Iris walked toward an apartment door she never passed through, had not yet reached its final page. What was settled, legally and permanently, was the verdict. 3 counts, 3 lives, guilty on all of them. What remained open was the question of what justice looks like when the crime involves a baby, a child, and a mother who saw it coming and could not get out in time. That question now sat with 12 people in a Maricopa County courtroom, and the family of Iris Sutherland Ross was still waiting. The apartment on North 16th Street is quiet now. The restaurant concepts are gone. The book is out of print. The social media accounts have been largely removed or archived. The brand called the Vegan-Magician no longer exists in any meaningful sense. But the case is not finished. Not yet. As of this documentary, a jury is still deliberating the final chapter of Anthony Milan Ross's legal story, deciding between life in prison and death. Wherever that verdict lands, what cannot be undone is what happened on December 24th, 2017. What cannot be undone is the video at 2:52 p.m. and the 911 call at 3:45 p.m. What cannot be undone is the text Iris sent her sister on December 20th, saying she was scared. What the case of Anthony Milan Ross leaves behind is not a story about weight loss gone wrong, or a marriage that fell apart, or a man who broke under pressure. It is a case study in the distance between image and character, in how wide that gap can grow, and how long it can stay hidden when the image is carefully maintained. He changed his body. He built a vocabulary around transformation. He stood in front of audiences and told them that change was a choice, that discipline was freedom, that the person you wanted to be was within reach. And people believed him because the evidence in front of them looked real. What did not change was the way he saw the people closest to him, as extensions of his identity, instruments of his control, and ultimately as threats to be eliminated when they stopped serving the image he needed to protect. Iris Sutherland Ross saw through it. She found the documents. She recognized what she was dealing with. She was building a way out for herself and her children. She was doing everything right. She deserved to make it. Nigel was 11 years old. He had a laugh his aunt said filled every room he walked into. He stood next to his father on Christmas Eve and sang off-key for a camera, not knowing what the next hour would bring. Honora was 10 months old. She had just started to crawl. These are the names this case belongs to, not his. That gap between who someone appears to be and who they actually are is where cases like this one begin. Learning to see it, to take it seriously before it reaches a point of no return, is the only thing that makes telling these stories worthwhile. That is why we tell them, and that is why their names, Iris, Nigel, and Honora, will not be forgotten.